What's going on, everyone? My name's Colby Knepp. I am the content guy for Train Heroic, and got a real special guest on the line today. We're joined by Luke Summers and John Welbourn. Guys, say what's up.
What's happening?
What's going on?
Today, we got a lot on the docket, but the goals for the show today, we want to familiarize you with transition training. We'll kind of define what that means, and then take a deep dive into maybe some common mistakes that we're seeing. And then we're also going to answer some questions that we get from the thousands of coaches just like you. To wrap things up, we'll give you 3 actionable steps you can implement to improve your training program. And if you're interested in what Train Heroic is all about, we're currently offering a free 14-day trial for coaches. Just click the link below to get started. So as I said in the intro, we're joined by John Welbourn. John is a 9-year veteran of the National Football League, CEO of Power Athlete, and creator of CrossFit Football. He grew up in California and graduated from the University of California at Berkeley in 1998. John was drafted with the 97th pick in the 1999 NFL Draft and went on to be a starter for the Philadelphia Eagles until 2003, appearing in 3 NFC Championship games, and also played for the Chiefs until 2007, before his career ended in 2008. Soon after that, John launched Power Athlete as a resource for power and strength athletes looking for access to world-class coaches and cutting-edge training practices in strength and speed. You can connect with John online at powerathletehq.com. John, fill in any holes from the intro and tell us your story.
Oh, geez, I think that was pretty good. Like you said, I grew up in Southern California. Went to high school and got into playing football because my older brothers played football and they both played in college. I'd had a pretty good introduction to strength training as a young guy. Just mainly there was an old powerlifter down the street from me who happened to be the U.S. powerlifting coach and coach like Bill Kazmaier and a lot of these different high-level strength athletes. And I started training in a garage, a 3-car garage with him and a bunch of other real strong guys, and really kind of grew out of that, and then went on to UC Berkeley, where I graduated in 4 years and then worked on my master's in my 5th and was a starter, and then from there got drafted to the Philadelphia Eagles with that 2nd pick in the 4th round, and went on to be a starter and started as a rookie, and then went on basically started for the rest of my NFL career. So pretty fortunate that not only did I get a chance to play for almost a decade in the NFL, but also I got to train with the world's best coaches. I mean, as a current high-level playing NFL player, I got a chance to go and work with some of the best people on the planet. So I think from that opportunity alone, I was able to really craft a lot of what we do here at Power Athlete. So in terms of like looking at different programs, working under different systems, whether it be running with Tom Shaw, who's down in Florida, who I ran with before the combine, and Rafael Rees, and Todd Rice, different people, Olympic lifting. So I had a really varied, very extensive training, and I was always one of those guys that I trained into this stuff. So I mean, I'm sure these high school coaches are thinking, "Wow, an NFL player, what's he going to talk about?" But for the most part, there's certain NFL players that, barring going to jail or getting hit by a car, are going to make it to the NFL. They're just naturally gifted, very strong, very big, fast athletes. I was one of those guys. I was kind of a late bloomer and really, really cut my teeth and built who I was through weight training and performance training, running and jumping and doing all these different training modalities. So when I retired, it was kind of interesting as I started kind of looking out like, hey, what should I do, once my career ended? My natural thing, having been an English major and really trying to go to law school, kind of was back on the table. And about that time, I got hit up with some people that were like, hey, we have some questions about training. Would you be willing to help us? And from there, that kind of really grew in. And I got approached by CrossFit about starting a specialty seminar for power athletes and really strength and conditioning, and really how to use necessarily what people are doing at a CrossFit gym, but kind of focus it for athletic development and athletic achievement. And we did that for a little bit, and then it really kind of grew into Power Athlete, which is my present company, and really the information resource with training that we really dump out on the internet, which is really an oasis, is what I like to believe it as, of good information. Because and I really commend and actually feel sorry for a lot of high school coaches and a lot of high school athletes today for the amount of information that they're presented with via the internet. So when I started training and started lifting weights, there was no internet. I mean, there was nobody to call. You went to your high school, and it just so happened that this old power lifter down the street who lifted weights in his garage invited me to go down there. It just so happened that this guy had a nutrition company and invented the super suits and the wraps, and was one of the pioneers in powerlifting. So I was just out of geography, very lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And at the kind of the peak of these things. So from there, and I grew up in that situation. Hence now you have the internet where there's so much information. And I think what was, most disconcerting to me was just how much, nonsense and just information and noise there is out there in the world today. And so really what Power Athletes is about is offering a, very simple, very basic, easy to digest, training programs, information about athletic performance, that we want to help your athletes get stronger, bigger, faster, move well, recover, do all these key factors without a bunch of dogma, a bunch of bullshit. And it's just a very, very simple approach, and the one that I would use and do use to train our athletes. And having worked with NFL players, Major League Baseball players, hockey players, track athletes, Olympic athletes. I mean, since I've retired in the last bunch of years, I've worked with a broad spectrum of athletes, and even going in and working with a naval special warfare. So I was able to take this model that we used to train NFL players and other high-level athletes, and actually took it over to the two special operations athletes, and started working with Navy SEALs, and have done that for a number of years. So this program and the information that we're presenting is information that I believe is to be the most cutting-edge information. And in a time when there's so much available to people, who do they trust? Who do they turn to? And more importantly, who do they listen to?
I would absolutely agree with your point about information overload. The internet is an awesome place, but also, it's a wild west. Anybody can just publish anything, and with the right marketing, it can get wheels. But Luke, tell us a little about you, man. How'd you get involved?
I work for John here in Southern California, and prior to that, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. Played football growing up since I was about the size of the helmet, and was also in just your standard stick and ball sports, baseball, basketball, and tinkered with that also growing up, but football is my primary sport. And I was fortunate enough to get into training young as well. My dad got me hooked up with one of his buddies who was a power lifter out in Chicago, and I went over there and just banged weights in his garage. And looking back and reflecting on it, what we were doing was essentially what we would deploy for any youth athlete currently. Hit some heavy fives, try to get a little bit of progression. We're going to get you big and strong. But one thing I didn't do was sprint, because he was a power lifter, and I got my good solid base level of strength put together. And then once I got big and strong, he kind of just shipped me off and told my dad, he's like, I can't do anything else for him. You're going to have to find another coach. And went to more of a performance-based style of training. But long story short, got injured at my senior year of high school, got a neck injury that prohibited me from playing in college, and then just basically took up training as a hobby, because what else are you going to do? Graduated from college with a degree in mathematics and a degree in computer science, and jumped into corporate gig for about 6 years, and learned about running business, pricing, product modeling, things like that, but all at the same rate, staying super engaged in the gym and training, and just kind of sucking the marrow of anything that would come across my desk. And I went to one of John's seminars, and truth be told, it was life-changing for me. And I realized, like, this is everything that I did, and I know everything I know to have worked in my development. And I've been messing around with all this other stuff that's just kind of static, and I've been getting nowhere. And I jumped back and kind of followed my roots and saw amazing gains in my training, and I played some competitive flag football. We were on a national area flag football team. It's all I was really clear to do with my neck injury. But it just kind of opened up my eyes, and I really grasped onto the methodology. And again, timing was everything, because location wasn't. John was out here in Southern California. He had a couple guys that bailed out on him. He needed some help with the seminar staff and running his gym out here. And I was at the point where I was fed up with corporate life and the whole 7 to 6 p.m. suit and tie gig and this fast track to middle management. What I joke around is calling the Midwest dream, which is, lease a car, get a dog, buy a house, find a girlfriend. And I did all that shit, and I was like, what do I do now? But it was just, I couldn't see myself living on that track for the next 30 to 40 years to earn something in my corporate lifestyle. I wanted to do something great, and I wanted to do it faster. So I took a leap of faith, packed up all my stuff, quit my middle management, fast track career, and moved out to SoCal to run a gym with John. And we complement each other quite a bit in the sense that I'm more of the technical side of things, and he's more of the visionary and has all this experience. And what we've created over the past 3-4 years is a way to deliver all of the things that I was exposed to by, just wandering around in the shadow of John Welbourn for 2.5 years. And I learned so much, and it took my coaching ability way higher than it ever would have, way higher than I ever could have taken myself. So I'm excited to be here. And like John said, soup to nuts, we have a pretty cutting edge system. But what is absolutely astonishing is how simple it is. And I wish we were sharp enough to create a widget or a gadget that you could only use this if you want to make your kids faster, stronger, and better. Yeah. But it's really not. We're truly here to share information and just, I guess, preach the good word. So
that's awesome. So the focus of today's talk is transition training, quote unquote, transition training. And for all you football coaches out there, we're moving from the in-season to the postseason right now. For many teams, that means the off-season's right around the corner. So, John, what mistakes do you see coaches making when transitioning from the in-season to the postseason, those that make it on to the playoffs?
Well, I think the biggest issue when you look at the transition is you really don't know how long the postseason is going to last. So, I'll give an example. We can give a couple different examples, as high school is more similar to the NFL than college. So think about, it's always sudden death. So the off season or the season ends, and you play pretty well. Now you have a good opportunity to be able to go out and play in the postseason. So how long is the postseason going to be? It really only depends on how long you win. So it might be 1 week, it might be up to 4 weeks. So when we always got into a situation in the off season, and I was fortunate to play in 3 NFC championship games with the Eagles, we never knew how long it was going to last. And so there was this suicide pace a little bit where nothing really changed between what we were doing in the season and what we were doing in the postseason. So I just kept doing exactly what I was doing because we were winning. And I'm sure football coaches listen to this, and any athlete that is listening to this will know people get superstitious when it comes to winning. So if you wear your lucky shoes on this day and you have this for dinner, next thing you know, you try to do that every day. And while I don't really buy into superstition, what I buy into is repetition and the idea of a pattern and really having a set ideals of this is what I do, and what by creating these patterns, you basically kind of I guess the word is you create a calm place where I don't have to think everything's in line for what I need to do. So my biggest thing for really the off season is just an extension of the second half of the season to me, and the way that I always break it up. Is the during the season is actually broken up into 2 pieces. So I break it up into part 1 and part 2, and if your season's 10 weeks long or 16 weeks long, it just depends on how big the block is. So for a high school, that might be 10 weeks, or even 11 or 12 weeks in a high school season. There's 2 6-week blocks, and I look at it and the way we program is for the first 6 weeks, I can continue to make gains. And I know this is kind of counterproductive to what a lot of these coaches are thinking. What do you mean make gains? Some of my best strength gains and some of my best performances in terms of the weight room, in terms of being able to lift weights in training, actually came in that first half of the season coming out of training camp. So think about this. As an athlete trains in the off season, all of a sudden they go into the preseason, training camp, the stimulus and the work capacity ends up going through the roof because you're actually doing all your sport-specific training. You're putting on the helmet, you're putting on the pads, you're doing this. We would still train very regularly in that preseason and training camp, and actually I would push all my strength work because all of a sudden now all I'm doing is sleeping and eating football, plenty of meals, being able to kind of go do this. And from there I would actually make some of my best strength gains and some of my best improvements for that first 6 weeks. Then that second half of the season, whether it be 6 weeks, 10 weeks, or however long it kind of fits out, my whole deal was about keeping intensity high but reducing volume. So, for example, I would come in on a Friday, and I knew if over that course of that first half of the season, I would always work up to a heavy bench on a Friday, and let's say I benched 405 for a set of 6 or 7. I would try to keep that number and keep driving that number over that first half of the season. Then once we got in that second part of the season, I would look at the weights that I was able to hit, and I would try to always get back to those poundages, but never at the same volume that I was able to lift. If I was able to lift it for 6 times, for the first half of the season, I might by the end of the season only be getting it for a single and double. And the idea was I didn't necessarily care how many reps I could get as long as I was able to handle and keep the intensity high. And what I found was that allowed me to continue to stay strong. And I think where people lose sight of really the weight room and the training is the training has to benefit you on the field. At the end of the day, I never got paid for lifting weights. I never got paid for the performance that I did in the weight room, but the performance and the things that I did in the weight room allowed me to go out in the field and be very successful. So therefore, I always looked at it like my ability to stay strong in the weight room was predicated on my ability to hit some lifts so that I knew I could go out 2 days later on a Sunday and my punch was going to be just as strong. So how we really kind of broke that thing up, and then all of a sudden you get to that final postseason, and you don't know because it's sudden death. So you might be in this thing for a week, you might be in it 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 at most. So at that point, nothing really changed. I still tried to come in and hit my same lifts, do my same style of training, and try to extend. It's impossible to periodize for the postseason because you might not even make it. If you're periodizing for the postseason, come the first week of training camp, I just don't think it necessarily works. So really, off-season or postseason is really a bonus. And and then the other interesting thing that we run into is when we talk to high school coaches about this, they kind of scratch their head and they think, God, that's really insightful. But they forget that the in-season can be one of your most important times for developing your athletes. So think about, let's say you got a team of 50 guys and 25 of those guys regularly play in terms of practice. They're the ones getting the majority of the reps. They're the ones that are playing on a Friday, for example. We also have 25 kids that are potential backups or, second string players that aren't getting as many reps. But just know that those kids 2 years from now are going to be your starters. So we actually end up offering multiple programs where we're trying to push those younger athletes who aren't really getting the reps and really aren't getting the same kind of abuse and taking the same kind of just basically just wear and tear that they're running into that the other starters are. And so we would actually push those kids even more and look at these stages as more of a development stage. And really, I got that from college. In that redshirt freshmen and the young guys who weren't necessarily playing did a different program. I mean, they were out there running, jumping, sprinting. I mean, they were doing off-season type workouts during the season. And the reason being is they didn't have a game day. They weren't getting the reps in practice. So therefore, the coaches looked at it as an opportunity to get these kids ready. And why are we going to all of a sudden give them a 3 or 4 or 5 month break? We should be pushing these guys. And it actually worked wonders in terms of developing those guys for the year after. So I think that situation is kind of easier. I think where a lot of coaches get really, really tricked up is transitioning from the off season to the in season, because now all of a sudden.
Well, John, before we pop in there, I mean, there's a lot that came out there that a couple global issues that we see going back to the initial in season to off season transition is using a lot of. Well, at the core, one of the biggest flaws is using percentage-based program. Oh, yeah. But a lot of the programs that we evaluate, Colby, they'll use old 1RMs, which their kids shouldn't be doing 1RMs anyways, to initiate a percentage-based program. So this is really a root cause problem to leaving a lot of reps on the table that really aren't doing any benefit. So maybe where we could John's jumped a lot based off, or jumped up and down a lot based off of his experience. But let's focus. Do you mind, Colby, if we just take one or two or three things that we really think as a global strategy for a high school football strength and conditioning coach or head coach, or that individuals who's wearing both hats, that we really think are kind of flaws, because it feeds into these transitional periods.
Absolutely. Yeah, go for it.
Really the biggest one Luke touched on a little bit already is using percentages in programs. And I know it's,
Is this big picture? Regardless of the time of year?
Yeah, no, this is this is a global thing. I mean,
and specific to, just to kind of whittle it down, specific to youth athletes. Now, perhaps in the NFL, there were percentages that you became familiarized with over your 15 years of training experience, but odds are that a lot of the kids that these coaches have maybe been lifting weights for 2 or 3 years, and they haven't quite earned the right to hit that.
Not to contradict you, but I've never really liked percentage-based programs as much as I've always liked rep maxes as a better tool. So we use a lot of rep maxes in our deal. I knew, if somebody asked me, okay, what do you bench? I knew what I could hit for a single, I knew what I could hit for a triple, and I knew what I could hit for a 5 or a 7. And for me, I was always about pushing those rep maxes. I was able to hit 445 on a bench for a set of 5, or
but you're the NFL athlete.
Well, I know, but
remember what these coaches should be doing isn't necessarily treating them like you, John Welbourn. I mean, they're dealing with a very different population of individuals.
And I think it's actually easier to do that stuff because I think what happens, if you look at just about any program, NSAM, NSCA, I mean, anything that they put out is always going to pack a percentage with that. And really, when you see a percentage, it's always basically taken from a 1RM. And the problem you run into is there are a couple key factors for an athlete to basically lift a legitimate 1RM. The biggest one is they need central nervous system efficiency to be able to get all of your motor units, all of your muscle fibers, all of your body, the intramuscular coordination, everything to work together to be able to drive that weight a single maximal time at a heavy percentage. Takes an amazing amount of training history and training volume and opportunities at doing the lifts. The other one is you're going to need a highly adapted individual that has proficiency in understanding how to do these lifts, and they need enough opportunity to have lifted heavy weights before. So most beginners you bring in, one, they don't have the training time just because merely they're new to this stuff. So they just haven't had enough swings at the bat, enough bites of the apple, whatever the analogy you want to give, to really be able to effectively lift a heavy 1RM. And one, they're never conditioned to be able to do it. You bring a kid in who's relatively new to strength training, and we get this all the time. Well, should I have them work up to a 1RM? And I'm like, why? They've never done it before. So what we do is we usually start our athletes very basic, and we pick, we use reps of 5. And the reason being is 5, the rep number or rep range of 5 is actually a balance between, strength and power, and it allows for, a mix of that myofibrillar and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy and other key factors. So we start with that, and we actually have them work up to sets of 5, and we start doing reps and sets of 5, and we just use a basic linear progression with our athletes, but have them develop at a rate and basically slowly, incrementally ratcheting up intensity while keeping the volume very constant with 3 sets of 5. And it's all based on, the Milo model, where, Milo was a young boy, he had a calf, and every day he lifted the bowl. By the time he grew to a man and the calf grew big, then he could still lift the bowl. So it's kind of this idea that the athlete kind of grows up under the bar, and we never put our athletes in a dangerous position. I mean, we hear all the time, testing 1RMs is dangerous. Yeah, goddamn right it's dangerous, because you're taking an athlete who's never done these things before, and you're putting them in a stressful situation. You're asking them to perform at an over 90% of their potential at a weight that they've never done before. I mean, I know this because I did this. When I was in high school, we used a percentage-based program, and it didn't work for me the same way that it worked for other people. And it just because I was training with more advanced athletes that were using percentage-based programs. And when I took a step back and realized the things that worked for me and what didn't, and then what worked for more and more athletes, I realized that actually basing everything on just a basic linear progression and rep maxes was a much, much more efficient way of training, because it allowed for some inherent periodization. If I came in some days and I was stronger, then I was able to push it a little bit more. If some days I wasn't, then I wasn't able to hit the same numbers, and it wasn't as if I was a slave to these percentages that I know I have to hit, 5 sets of 6 at 80%. What happens if I come in and on the first rep I get stapled to the ground? All of a sudden, is that squat workout worthless? No. Right. So what it does is it allows for some inherent periodization. It allows us to constantly be chasing reps instead of being like, well, I know that, this is my 90%. Be like, no, I'm able to hit these numbers because these are the numbers that I need to hit, not necessarily the percentages. And so what we, the way we back into it is there's certain rep ranges that correspond with percentages, and you guys can go look this up. It's on Prilipin's table, and it's some testing that was done on high-level Olympic lifters in Russia that were extremely high-level, very adapted, very explosive athletes. And what they did is they timed lifts, and when the lifts decreased in speed, then they figured that was outside their ability to lift that weight. And it just has never worked for the masses. But yet coaches get romance with this idea of percentages, so we kind of just threw it out. And we don't necessarily use it. And another big problem, too, is when you do these percentage-based programs, and let's say the kid is well-trained, awesome, great, he squats a 1RM, all of a sudden you're going to use those same percentages for the next 6, 8, 10 weeks. Mm-hmm. How do you know that athlete is able to lift that consistently? So what we found is that the only time percentages really work is within about 3 to 5 days after after the athlete does it. So for a lot of times in our program, we'll have somebody work up to a rep max, and then we'll end up cutting weight and having them do something, some of the volume work within a percentage of what they did on that given day. And I realized that in my own training that percentages were only accurate on that certain day. I mean, there were times when we did programs where it was like, hey, you're going to periodize this 9 weeks, and then in the 10th week, we're going to test this 1RMs. 4 weeks into the program, all of a sudden, the reps and the numbers that I'm supposed to be hitting are light. And I remember asking my coach, I'm like, hey, this weight's way too light for me. And he's like, don't worry about it, just keep doing it, and at the end we'll test and you'll look great. I got to that 10th week and bombed out when just did terrible. And so the next time that thing came around and all of a sudden 4 or 5 weeks in, I started feeling good. I just said fuck it, and I went for new percentages and ended up literally crushing my old stuff. And then I didn't say anything. I just wrote them down, and then all of a sudden I went back to what I was doing. I got to the end of 10 weeks, and I wasn't able to hit those same numbers. So what I realized, it's kind of, everybody is very different in terms of their nervous system, how they're recovering, all these other key factors. What's the load on this athlete? What's the school load? What's happening at home? I mean, there's a million key factors. So keeping somebody in a percentage-based program where they're a slave to something doesn't necessarily translate to the best athletic performance and really what we can do. So what we're really talking about is being able to really just offer a good, intelligent, smart way of being able to attack the training to where your athletes can continue to make gains and be able to keep progressing at a good rate.
So what I'm hearing is one of the big mistakes you guys are seeing across the board is number one, basing programs off percentages, and
yes.
The better way to do that would be starting with 5s and just adding weight each week.
Yeah, I mean, just a basic linear progression, or even testing different rep maxes, which is a more advanced way of doing it. But it's and I know this sounds a little wild, but when you look at a lot of the programs and a lot of the programs that these coaches are following for their athletes, they're really coming out of college or they're coming out of places for more advanced athletes. And the problem is that you can't, and this is the probably the thing which, I started a bunch of years ago when we started offering programming, is I started offering different levels. Like, where are you? Who are you as an athlete? And where are you in your training lifestyle or your training life cycle? Like, are you a beginner? Is this year one for you? Have you never lifted a weight? How can you expect somebody who's never lifted a weight and who's brand new to weight training, strength training, how could you expect them to come in and do the same program that a guy that played in the NFL for 10 years did?
And the fact is they probably could, but it wouldn't have as an accelerated adaptation curve.
No.
You're leaving so much on the table.
Because, right? I mean, for a relatively unadapted new athlete, they can make gains in the weight room that I would basically sell my soul to be able to make. Mm-hmm. We had one of our athletes come in, and he was, relatively had never really changed before. I'd gone to the gym and like screwed around with some lat pull downs and some BS cable machines, but it had never really been in a what we call a real strength conditioning program, where it's barbells, running, sprinting. I mean, actually things that you do to create athletes, just not going to the gym to try to get sweaty. We put him into a basic program, and I remember he came in and he was 165 pounds. We started working up, and I stopped him. I think he squatted 3 sets of 5 at 165 pounds. I figured body weight was pretty good. His technique was looking okay. It was right on the board of it, starting to look a little dicey, but he could still handle it, and I felt comfortable with that. And he said, "Is that good?" I'm like, "It's good. Let's go work on some other stuff." We came back that next, 2 days later, and he's like, "What do you want?" I'm like, "Let's add 170 to the bar." He squatted 170, and then we went on, and we started kind of for those 3 sets of 5. Over the course of 20 weeks, I watched him add 200 pounds to his squat.
Wow.
He ended up squatting 365 for a set of 5, and then that following week he squatted 405 for a single. He went from a body weight of 165 up to 205. So he ended up gaining like 40 pounds of body weight. His deadlift, he ended up pulling in the mid 4s on his deadlift. He ended up benching in the, I think he was right around 275. And for any guy who's ever out here, the squat and the deadlift always go up exponential towards the bench press, because the upper body just takes a long time in terms of physical development and maturity and work to really be able to get that bench up. And I think it's really easy to really drive these other things. So, I mean, we just started with a basic template, and it just blew through the roof. I mean, he had enough recovery, he had enough training, it wasn't too much, it was just the right, perfect amount. And at that point, we started using all of our beginning athletes on it. We've had thousands of athletes that have followed our programming from all over the globe. I mean, we've taught seminars from New Zealand to the Arctic Circle and worked with thousands of athletes around the globe. And this story that we're talking about, our young athlete, isn't,
it's not an anomaly.
Yeah, it's not an anomaly. I mean, it's not the exception, it's the rule. Every athlete that comes into this program gets these type of gains. We have high schools all over the country that have been using this stuff. And it's always funny because whenever we talk to the coaches, they always kind of keep it a little under the hat. And they're like, let those other guys keep running in circles. We're going to keep doing this stuff.
And I do want to interject real quick, too, maybe segue into one of the next things that we see as one of the flaws globally for strength and conditioning coach. We talked about this athlete putting up some impressive numbers on these lifts, which numbers are also an issue and problematic in high school football's weight rooms. And that's because people get wrapped up around the idea that numbers in the weight room drive success on the field, and that's just not the fact. Now, that's not to say that, hey, you shouldn't worry whether or not your athletes can lift heavy or not. That is a marker or a gauge of progression in your program. It's your ability to bridge the gap between the gains you are allowing your athletes to make in the weight room to on-field performance. And we refer to this as ensuring skill transfer over any sort of numbers in the weight room first.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I also think people have to be realistic. Like, for example, if you just looked at top-end numbers and you had a guy like our young athlete who squatted 365, that's a decent squat for a high school kid. I mean, that's a really good squat.
Yeah.
But, if all of a sudden you saw that number and there was another kid that squatted 405, he'd kind of be middle of the road. But then you realize that kid ended up putting 200 pounds on a squat in 20 weeks. And then what that did to his athletic performance, he was always a pretty good athlete, good player. All of a sudden, we added that. It just created exponential environment. So I think where people kind of get a little lost is they look at just like, okay, what were the numbers they hit, and not necessarily what where they came from. And so for us, when we go into anything, my idea is like, let's test them on these basic things. I don't need to see 1RMs. Let's start here. Let's see where they start, and then let's see the rate of improvement that they make over the course of the year, more so than the end of the year. Hey, let's test everybody's 1RMs. All of a sudden, the guys who got the best numbers must have worked the hardest. And I think that's just that's being lazy as a coach. You have to be able to look and say, where's my athlete starting day one, and more importantly, where am I getting him to? And then, and this is always the most difficult thing to kind of get through to people, is all of these tools, and whether it be strength, speed, everything that we're looking to develop in the weight room has to be applied and useful and be able to translate to on the field performance. So you might have a kid come in who squats 500 pounds, but if he runs a 7 flat 40, or every time he goes to change direction, he falls down, he's not a useful football player. So what, and then here's another thing too, if all of a sudden a kid gets really strong, really fast, all of a sudden, if he stops running and moving and changes direction and starts, doing, if he just stops running, because you run in this a lot of times. Oh, I'm not running our guys. We're not doing any conditioning. We're really not doing any plyos, any athletic work. We're just working on getting these guys strong. Well, the problem is if you get an athlete really strong without allowing them or giving them opportunity to use their strength and to learn how to use it in space and move and do a lot of these things, it ends up becoming kind of a hindrance.
Yeah, non-functional. And not like functional, like the cool new functional fitness, like the original functional.
Yeah. Like, I mean, that also happens with body weight. So if you see a young athlete come in and all of a sudden he puts on 20 or 30 pounds and he has not been doing something like, his footwork and whether it be jumping ropes, sprinting, changing direction, running ropes, or just even doing, basic dot drills or change of direction, really anything that we would deem as athletic style of training. And it's kind of a funny misnomer, but you guys know what I'm talking about in terms of like going out and having them do agility work. And the thing is, if you continue to do that work in the off season while your athletes are gaining weight or getting bigger or putting on size and muscle, they will learn to bring it in, to learn how to use it in space. The one thing you don't want to have an athlete do is all of a sudden get big and strong, put on a bunch of weight, and not have done any type of agility or athletic training, and then all of a sudden put them in training camp and expect them to be the same performer. No, I mean it happened to me where I got hurt at the end of during my rookie year, and they just had me in there just banging weights, and I ended up putting on some weight and getting big and strong, and I was feeling real good, and then I went to go out and play. And I remember getting in my stance, setting back, and this defensive lineman ran around me like I was a big planet. He was orbiting me, and I realized, I was like, "Shit! I made a mistake." And I literally went back to the drawing board and was like, "I got to fix this mistake." And I had about 6 or 8 weeks to fix it, and I fixed it and came in and started and did fine. So I think a lot of coaches, get idea with this idea of romancing of the numbers. And I think while the numbers are important, it's only about where you start and where you finish. Like if a guy, for example, squats 400 pounds the first day, and at the end of the season, or at the end of the off season, he squats 405, but he's still the strongest guy on the team. Is that a problem? Well, yeah, it is, because he didn't make any improvement. Like that. That's what I think.
Well, you also want to couch that too with, did he get better on the field? Right, because that's what it all comes down to.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to. But if you're using the off season as a way to temper these athletes and get them, and I think where people also get a little bit lost is the idea that to be a good football player, it takes three things. You have to have the physical, you have to have the mental, and you have to have the emotional. So you have to be intelligent enough and have your wits about you to be able to process information and then be able to use and use your body as a tool to bring out this information or express the information. You have to have the physical tools to be able to survive the training. You have to be able to get out there, be able to do it with enough repetition to be good at it, and then you have to be emotionally capable enough to be able to deal with the rigors of it, the grind, being able to have to go to practice and travel and do all these other key factors in effect with, being a student and having a life and all these other things. So I think it really takes, this kind of three-prong attack. And I think as a strength coach, you almost work with your athletes, and I'm sure a lot of people on here are high school coaches who kind of double as the head coach or position coach and strength coach. You get an opportunity to work with these kids day in and day out and day in and day out and see them. And I think where some of the high-level strength coaches I've worked with, or even like Kaz at over at Baylor, who was one of our guys at Kansas City, he told me his biggest thing is obviously preparing these guys, but preparing them for the rigors and the demands that they're going to see emotionally and mentally. The ability to deal with boosters or people or success and ups and downs and highs and lows. And I think, as a strength coach, your job is so important to not only train these kids mentally or physically to get them prepared for the next season, but also to put them in, difficult and stressful situations and not coddle them in any way, so that you're preparing them for what's ahead of them. I mean, football in the last couple of years has, come under fire tremendously for a lot of the head injuries and a lot of the concussions and a lot of the problems that are facing a lot of NFL players. And I firmly believe that, through good technique and training and actually effectively strengthening the organism, athletes can survive if this is how they want to do. And that, if you put in the hours, you put in the work, and you really follow a smart, well thought out, good progression in a program, you can effectively, create your suit of armor and become Iron Man in a way, create this meat suit in a way that will allow you to be able to go out and use your skills and talents and be successful in the field.
So from listening to previous interviews, I know that you're pretty big on mindset and motivation, and that's kind of what we're diving into now. So what advice can you offer coaches to help motivate their players?
There's two types of motivation in football. There's negative reinforcement and there's positive reinforcement. And I guess you could say a third, like there's punishment or fear. So, and I played for all types of coaches. I played for coaches that were, very positive. Hey, I want to pull the best out of you, and the type of people that you connected with, and that almost like a father figure, you wanted to go out and win and play well to please them. And then I also played with other coaches who were extremely negative, and they coached through negative reinforcement. And you went out and you played hard out of fear of what was going to happen if we didn't play well. One of those guys was the most prominent one was a former head coach in the NFL, and now he's a pretty good offensive line coach. So that guy was we went out and we did and played at a high level out of fear of what was going to happen if we didn't. So you have that kind of father figure you want to play for. You want to be do the best for, which was a guy like Dick Vermeil, who I played with in Kansas City. You wanted to go out and win the game for Dick, because he was like the grandfather you never had. I mean, everything, hug you when he sees you and tears in his eyes. And we went out and won a lot of games and did well because we wanted to please that guy. The guy I played for, Tom Cable, was the exact opposite. You just you were hoping to go out and win games out of fear. And then you have that third guy who's you almost go out and you want to survive this thing because you don't know what's going to happen. So I think in terms of mental preparation, if you can put athletes in difficult situations and teach them to suffer a little bit, whether it be in conditioning, and I don't mean like physical, but like pushing them past the point at which they can be. I mean, we use a lot of different implements for this. I mean, swinging kettlebells, prowlers, conditioning things where we can kind of strip it away and allow athletes to kind of expose who they really are. And you can see who quits and who doesn't, and who you have to coddle and who you got to push. And you can kind of start understanding your athletes. And I think where the offseason gets overlooked, and this is something that I've said to numerous high school coaches, is don't wait until game day to know who your athletes are. If you're walking into a game and you don't know exactly who every player is and how they're going to react in terms of stressful situations, you have not done your job as a coach. So what we talk about is putting, whether it be metabolic conditioning, some form of, something that's going to be difficult. And we use, our workouts in a kind of a different kind of way, in that, I want to develop the mental aspect where my athletes are tough, they're strong, they'll persevere when it's hot, when it's terrible. I mean, I grew up the youngest of three boys, and I would not say that I grew up in a kind and gentle way at any means. And I remember I complained one time to my mom that, it was hot and it was hard, and I think I was in college, and, this was just, it was killing me at training camp. And she just quietly said, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And that idea of, you've put in the hours of the training, you've tested your athletes, you've put them through the crucible, worked them, trained them, talked to them, developed cohesion in a team by some shared suffering. And then, at that point, you've done all the work, and now it's time to go through and, see how it pays off. And, my only advice for a high school coach is don't wait until the season to know who your players are. Figure it out in the off season. Figure out who you can depend on, who your leaders are, who you can push, and who you can, who you got to hold, who you got to push, and how it all kind of fits. And really, coaching is about just that, is how to motivate each individual, because not everybody motivates the same way. And any coach that just tries to blanket motivate everybody the same way, that I'm just going to literally just, punish everybody that does anything, just will never really get the same results. And, not everybody really can be motivated in the same way. So finding how to motivate different people is probably the most important aspect of learning to coach.
So we kind of touched on this a few minutes ago, but there are many different philosophies about training for prep level athletes, whether it's about sport specific versus GPP, or periodization versus conjugate versus more basic forms of training. It seems like the market is totally divided. So how would you program for the prep level athlete, and why? And so let's maybe take a deep dive into what that looks like: preseason, off season, in season, etc.
Yeah, first of all, the conjugate method shouldn't really be used with beginners. It's an advanced form of training developed by the Russians where they would rotate different movements, different bars, different lifts. And the idea is that they wanted to avoid accommodation. And the way it's written is that lifts over 90% done on the exact same lift over 3 weeks, you start developing, accommodation, and all of a sudden the adaptation slows. That's actually for high-level athletes, but for beginning, amateur, young, unadapted athletes,
prep level,
we want accommodation. So
that's like the goal.
Accommodation is really what we're searching for.
Explain what accommodation means.
Accommodation. I mean, the idea of accommodation is so that you actually get your body adapts, and then there's a detraining effect.
Because that's weightlifting. I mean, you're stressing a posture and a position. And that, whether it's a bilateral hip hinge through the squat or a lunge or a step, you're stressing that with a barbell. And that stress will drive an adaptation, and that adaptation is either strength or power, depending on how you've applied that movement, right?
Yeah.
So if the stress stops working, that's accommodation.
Yeah, so when no longer the stress starts working, and there's also some mental and physical factors for training over 90% for longer than 3 weeks, and that's really what the West Side conjugate method is based on. The only problem is that's for advanced athletes that have a very well adapted nervous system that they can that basically accommodation can happen, which means that their nervous system is so adapted that it can adapt in 3 weeks. What we know is that for a amateur, untrained, basically the market that we're discussing right now, they have about 3 to 6 weeks of intramuscular coordination, which means that the muscle is going to coordinate from within itself, and then all those muscles are going to coordinate over the next anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks with the intramuscular coordination, and then it's going to start pushing out with hypertrophy and strength and all these key factors. I mean,
that doesn't account for growth spurts either.
Yeah, and growth spurts. So really the idea of rotating lifts and offering different lifts to beginning athletes is probably one of the worst things you can do to stymie your progress. And, once again, you're looking at an adapted, very advanced system with the Westside Conjugate Method. And I trained out at Westside. Louis Simmons is a great friend of mine. And this is nothing against his program, having done his program, but there's a time and a place for everything. And using an advanced program like the Westside Conjugate system for a beginning athlete really leaves a lot of gains on the board. I mean, really what those guys need is just a basic barbell. They need to squat, they need to press, they need to pull, they need to bench, and they need a power clean, which is just our 5-day or a 5-lift basic program that has a mix of body weight, accessory stuff, and sprint and change direction. And it's a very, very simple basic program. And it's because it's actually the most difficult program you could ever write for an athlete, and the only ones that could ever handle it are a beginner. I think people tend to look at the most advanced things, and they think that the most advanced stuff is the best, and that's just not the case. It's actually the most basic, the very simple idea. I'm just going to add weight to the bar, and you know what? It might not be heavy today, but in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 weeks, this is going to be a lot of weight, and it just seems to work very, very well. What were some of the other things that the other programs or things that you brought up?
Well, actually, go ahead and dive into like how you guys would say a high school athlete walks into the gym and got a little bit experience, weight training, stuff like that. But it sounds like it's just a super basic linear periodization, add weight to the bar. As long as he's getting stronger, things are moving the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's this kind of interesting deal, and we really talk about like when you look at strength training and you really look at any program or really how an athlete's progressing, it's really there's an inverse relationship between volume and intensity. And the idea is that, volume being the amount of reps you can lift and the intensity being how heavy you can lift. I mean, when people refer to intensity, I think they refer to like effort. And I think I always kind of get a chuckle out of that a little bit because effort's assumed. I assume you're always going as hard as you can and you're not sandbagging. So I don't need to actually put effort in. But I mean, there's some programs like a perceived rep effort type deal, which is like Mike Tusher's system. And, how hard you went. I always assume that number's a 10, that you're always going to go as hard as you can. So for us, we look at volume and intensity as the amount of reps that you lifted versus, how heavy you trained. So the idea being, if I asked you to, stack up your 1RM or the heaviest weight you could, how many reps could you realistically get? You could get 1. So when intensity is high, volume is low. If I all of a sudden cut that weight in half, which would be 50%, I ask you for max reps, you might get 15 to 20, so all of a sudden volume went up as intensity. So there's this kind of inverse reaction or an inverse relationship between volume and intensity. And what I did with our beginning program is I kept volume constant and said, all right, you know what? For our key lifts, we're just going to do 3 sets of 5. Super basic, 15 lifts or 15 reps of each movement. And we're going to start with just a basic linear progression. And we're going to pick a rep rate or a number that really doesn't matter. And I know that sounds kind of crazy. Like, what do you mean it doesn't matter? I want you to work up to a set of 5 to the point where it looks good. Where I'm pleased with the lift, and it's just on the verge of breaking down. Like you see, as a kid squatting, all of a sudden his upper back breaks a little bit, his knees are coming in, he's getting a little tibial torsion, and all of a sudden I see a little bit of breakdown, a little bit of struggle. Perfect. All right, cool. 2 more sets of 5. Let's get that done. Then let's get on to the next stuff, and from there we'd probably hit a bunch of our accessory movements, whether it be pull-ups, chin-ups, whether it be lunging, stepping. I mean, anything that kind of is our accessory in terms of our lower body primals. The next day they would come in, and let's say they were going to hit the upper body. Same thing on the bench, same thing on a press, and then obviously our second leg day would come back with obviously a deadlift or and some squatting. So from there. It would really be based on that, 3 sets of 5 for our deadlift. We also, through a bunch of testing, found that the deadlift is much harder on the central nervous system to recover from than squatting. That we had athletes that could squat every single day. And I mean, we did a program where I think I squatted singles for 18 days in a row between 550 and 650, and I was fine. You threw a heavy deadlift in there, and all of a sudden, it would take, 7, 10, 12, 14 days to be able to recover from a real heavy deadlift. And the idea is that, and when we went back and looked at a lot of the research, the load on the central nervous system from the weight in the hand and also the stress and pulling of the back and the maximal type deal is just a much more dramatic in terms of versus squatting. So while we squat 2 days a week, we end up pulling heavy once every 7 days. And we really are very, very detailed on how many reps we push out for the deadlift. So for us, we just pull 5 heavy reps and call it a day, and then get to our other stuff and use a little bit of the Louis system in that I like to get a little bit more volume on the pulling away from the deadlift, and with whether it be pull-ups or chin-ups or one-arm rows or bent rows or other key movements. So I think where a lot of people really struggle with their deadlift is they really deadlift way too much. When we ended up cutting the volume on our deadlifting and looking at actually keeping the volume low but keeping the intensity high, we saw people just skyrocketing the deadlifts. So it's just like anything. Deadlifting looks cool. It's fun. You get to pull heavy weight. It makes a great picture at the top. But for the most part, and this goes back to my days of training with George Zangus. George always told us you build your squat, you build your deadlift with a big squat, and you do it with a lot of pulling. And that the deadlift was kind of like a pretty girl. You got to kind of ignore her a little bit, give her too much attention, she won't like it. Which is a direct George Zangus quote. Yeah, he was a wealth of information for us. But I always remember he said, you know why you treat a deadlift like a pretty girl? And I was like. I was like 15 years old.
It's your first bit of dating advice. I love it.
Yeah, he's like, you got to ignore her. If you give her too much attention, she'll walk all over you and you won't get anywhere. And I was like, really? Okay, that makes sense. But awesome. Those little tips have always kind of stuck with me. And, and it's played out tried and true. And I think what's a little bit different, at least with me and a lot of our stuff, is this is training that I used to get where I was. And this is training we've used with countless athletes. And so we're not really, talking about it like, oh, yeah, I'm going to write this program or this theoretical. I mean, this is something that we actively use and with, tens of thousands of athletes around the world.
So shifting gears a little bit, going back to those transition times, what 3 things can a coach, or it doesn't have to be 3, but anything that kind of comes to mind, what number of things can a coach implement now to improve the outcomes of these transition times? You could give an example like off-season to preseason, in-season to postseason, or in-season to off-season?
I think that the biggest, hopefully I get this right, but I think really the biggest transition for any athlete is really going to be, the season's ending, and now I need to get into the off-season. That is, to me, is the most special. Best time if I could work with athletes exclusively in that short little window, and I think there's kind of 2 schools of thought. I played with guys who would get done on Sunday, the season would be up, they'd take off Monday, have our meetings, and then they were back in the gym on Tuesday. And for me, I never did that. I always took 5-7 days off, relaxed a little bit, made sure I was kind of doing some stuff, and I always came back with this idea of I'm going to do a little bit of conditioning. And I know that doesn't make a lot of sense, but we always did something called the metabolic conditioning circuits, which we use right now on Field Strong with the Power Athlete metabolic conditioning circuits, which are kind of these based on a lot of kind of philosophy, and it's this idea of really prepping the athlete for what's ahead of them. I'm going to build a big wide base so that I can kind of pyramid it up. And really kind of keep them at a little lighter weight, drive some growth hormone, get some kind of lactic acid threshold type stuff, and we use just these some basic circuits using 10 reps and do some things to really kind of drive some adaptation and more importantly heal up any problems. I think the worst thing you can do is jump into a really heavy single double kind of type program early on. So whether or not you wanted to do, it's like we do with the Power Athlete metabolic conditioning circuits, or you come in and you want to do some conditioning stuff with whether it be kettlebells or anything that's a little outside the norm, because for the next 6 months, really, the athlete's going to lift weights. So whether it be sandbags or kettlebells or odd implements, push prowlers, anything we can to really kind of get these athletes back and start developing some kind of that anaerobic and aerobic capacity is going to pay such big dividends, because all of a sudden they're going to create a nice wide base, and then at which point we can take a little bit of time to really kind of get those guys kind of fresh and mental and kind of in the grind, and then all of a sudden we kind of start periodizing into more, like we said, more of a basic strength and conditioning program where they're going to hit their squat 2 days a week, they're going to pull heavy, they're going to pull dynamic, they're going to do all their accessory work, they're going to sprint, do their change of direction, do their agility, and kind of start really just moving in space. And I think being able to kind of change displacements, we want to do some obviously flat type running, we want to do some hills, we want to push prowlers, and we want to kind of do anything and everything that we can. I mean, in college we did a ton of overspeed with rubber bands, but when I got to the NFL, we really didn't do any overspeed anymore, and really because that was really developmental in those years. So it became more about being able to run as fast as you can, and that's another really interesting thing. Just from our own research and the work we did, training within the Charlie Francis system, is strength is really built in this kind of this no man's land of like 75 up to 90%. The majority of programs that we were to look at, if we were to take all the reps and the percentages of just about every program on the planet, put them into a pie graph, the biggest slice of training would be in that kind of 75 to 90%, and with very few reps outside of 90. But what happens when you get into the sprint stuff, actually training in that no man's land, we call it a no man's land, is actually adversely hurts your athletes. So for us, when we go out and we run, we do a pretty extensive warm-up. We work on arm swing prep, all the A skips, B skips, all the standard track type movements, and try to get a lot of really technique work. And then from there, we work on running. But those sprints have to be always done within a certain percentage of whatever we decide their fastest time is. And that the idea is that to run fast, or to be fast, you have to run fast. Running slow is not going to do anything on the football field, and running and jogging. I mean, and I know you giggle, but it's like, we watch coach do this all the time. They send their athletes out and they have them run, one of the classic workouts we did in high school with my high school coach was 16 220s. So we would go out and we would run, 16 reps of, half around the field. And, it was basically, they called it speed work. It wasn't. There was no way we were running as fast as we could. There's no way a bunch of high school kids can go out and run 16 220s on a speed day. Right. So what we look at, like, speed work is that ability to run over 90%. How many reps can you really do? It depends on your conditioning and your capacity. So we'd send our athletes out, and we'll keep them running as long as they can maintain the speed. The minute the speed drops off, we end up cutting them that day. And you know what? We have other ways to get their conditioning in more so than just running them. But just being able to get athletes out there and run, being able to put them in a good sprint program, a good agility stuff. And then the other one is realizing that these are football players. So, we talk about, what they do in the weight room, getting out and running and working on their speed development, but then offering them enough sport-specific kind of adaptation, like, whether it be receivers being able to go out and run routes against DBs, or offensive linemen just working on their kick slides and hands against pass rushers, being able to put these athletes out there and have them, within their training program, still doing the technique and working the system is, that's what really pays the dividends. And if you start looking at the best in the world, and I was fortunate to work with some of the best players and ever to play the game, their attention to detail and their mastery of the movements did not stop the minute that they were away from the facility. I mean, you guys might know a guy named Tony Gonzalez. I was best man at his wedding. We went to college together and we played together with the Chiefs. But guy played 17 years, arguably the best tight end to ever play the game. And Tony started every practice catching 150 balls out of the jug machine. At the end of practice, he would stay after and catch 150 balls out of the jugs. What did he do in the off season? He and his brother or different people would show up in the morning and show up at night, and he would catch 300 balls a day. I remember going on vacation with a football and throwing the ball to him. So his attention to detail never wavered, whether or not we were in the weight room, whether or not it was in the off season or during the season. He was always so meticulous with it, and that's why that guy is the best in the world at what he does.
So you talked a little bit about building a wide base. What do you mean by that?
When I talk about building a wide base, I really relate a lot of my training philosophy back to this idea of the pyramids, and that just kind of came from this idea of the most stable, strong structure on the planet is a pyramid. If you look at the pyramids at Giza, if you go all through Mexico and you look at the Mayan pyramids, they are the longest surviving structures on the planet. And it's for a reason, because they have a big wide base. They cascade up to the top, and they pyramid up to the top and come to a point. And I really think that's a perfect representation of what an athlete needs to do in terms of to get to the pinnacle, with the top of that point being his success on game day. So that big wide base, you have to create that, and that's done through recovery. That's through nutrition. I mean, making sure they sleep. I mean, if you guys take one thing away from this, if you wanted to try to ramp up just very easily one performance aspect for your athletes, is actually more sleep. We worked with a bunch of high school kids, and with the advent of the internet and YouTube and all these other key, phones and a whole bunch of things that I didn't have to grow up with, thank God. These kids aren't just getting near the sleep they used to. So, even being able to push an athlete to be able to get 7 or 8 hours of sleep a day will probably be the single most important performance gain that you could ever hope for these kids. But creating that big wide base with, some metabolic conditioning, getting them in shape. And I know that's kind of, people might not think about it as much, but there has to be, you have to be in good enough shape to be able to survive the training day in and day out. It's very known fact the athlete who's in better shape will not get injured as much, will be able to train with a higher intensity, and will be able to handle a longer load over a greater amount of time. So, being able to come in and do some short metabolic conditioning, a little glycolytic work, will play massive dividends in terms of creating that big base that we can start stacking on with, like, agility, with sprint, with strength work, with accessory, and all these other key factors, and then pyramid all of those up for their ability to be able to go out and use these tools to demonstrate that they're proficient and that they have athletic success on the field.
So last question, we're going to wrap this baby up, and Luke, feel free to jump in on this one too. And your guys' experience, what's the difference between high performers and those who struggle to achieve much, specifically high school athletes?
You want me to jump in?
Yeah, I'll take it. This is kind of an age-old question, and there's kind of three parts to this. And I think, like, you have, and so you can bear with me or allow me a little bit of latitude on this. You have people that are naturally great athletes, and you see those all the time, and we don't have to point them out. You instantly watch them, and those of you coaches listening have had people on your team that the minute you watch them do something, they're just natural athletes, and then instantly goes through your head, that kid's an athlete. And then you have, he's very athletic. And then you have kids who are great athletes. And, that's a kid who's that good football player who knows how to run. He has a sense of the game. He knows where the holes are. He's a knee bender. He moves in space well. He can make tackles one-on-one. He does everything. And he's your great athlete. Is your great athlete necessarily the most athletic guy on the field? Not always. Is the most athletic guy the best athlete? Not always. Because football is one of those games that, even though you might be a phenomenal athlete, to play football, you have to, you're like a phenomenally athletic, you have to be a good football athlete, which means that you have to understand the game, and that's having opportunity to have played the game. And then on the other side of that is you have peak athletic performance, that guy that plays at such a high level that he's just so much more dominant. It's usually the guy that is usually pretty athletic, has understood the game and has had enough opportunities to go out and do these things. And really, the biggest difference that we see between the good and the great athletes is merely opportunity to do something. You bring in a kid who, has never played football, but he's kind of a late bloomer, and all of a sudden he seems like he's okay, but then you give him 2 or 3 and 4 years to play, and you give him opportunity to play, and he kind of grows into everything. That kid ends up being pretty good, but you give a ton of opportunity to a guy who might only be 5'7". He's probably not going to get a chance to go play in college and the pros because he might be too little. So there's kind of this weird kind of balance between the two. So I think for people, and here's another interesting fact. I sat next to just totally randomly. I got on an airplane and I sat down in the middle seat, and the guy sitting next to me was kind of a young dude watching an iPad, and he was watching cut-ups. He was watching end zone and sideline stuff. And I kind of glanced over my shoulder, and he's watching a bunch of college, and then he's watching some NFL. He's watching some college. And he sees me kind of looking over his shoulder, and so he kind of turns and shows it to me, and I look at it, and he's like, "So what do you see?" I'm like, who be watching? And he's like, "Oh, we're watching this kid, and this kid, and this kid." And I was like, "All right." He's like, "What do you think of that guy?" I'm like, he's got kind of slow feet. You see how he kind of lunges, and the guy kind of like leans back a little bit. He's like, "Did you play college football?" And I kind of nodded my head. I'm like, "I did play some college football." So then we go on a little bit more, and he's watching the NFL stuff. He's like, "What do you think of this guy?" I'm like, that guy punches, he lunges too much. This guy plays on the ground. And then he kind of leans back. He's like, "Did you play in the NFL?" I'm like, "I did." Then he asked me my name, and it turned out he was one of the scouts for the Rams, and he actually scouted me. So we sat there for the next bunch of hours talking about, the different players, who I played in this, and he asked me a really interesting question. He said, "Do you believe that somebody could trick you into thinking they were athletic?" And I said, "In the realm of football, 100%. Because football is a series of movements that are not necessarily natural to people. And you guys know, like in terms of bending your knees, punching and sliding, all these other key factors, how to throw the ball, how to catch. Being able to run in space and move. Those aren't natural. People just aren't naturally born with a lot of these abilities. But what you do is you develop them in over the course of a lifetime, and you become so proficient with enough opportunities to do this, enough reps, enough just time and reps, you develop these skills, and you watch it on film, you make tweaks, and you basically hone the craft to where, to the layman who doesn't know the individual, doesn't know the amount of work they've done, that person's a great athlete. Look at what he does. He's doing things that only great athletes do. Well, that's true. Those great athletes might do that stuff if they were on day one. But somebody that's been forced to do this over a lifetime should be able to develop into these things. And so when you talk about peak athletic performance and those guys that play at the high, we talked about it earlier, that 3-prong attack of like mental, physical, and emotional. Those peak type people, those 0.0001% of the people that get a chance to go on and do this job for a long time. Those guys have all 3 of those. They're gifted athletes. They're very athletic. They're able to they've honed their craft to the point of mastery. They are extremely mentally tough. They've been through the rigors. They've been through the fire. They've been through the crucible. They've done everything they have to know that in the most stressful, most violent of game day situations, that person will not waver. And then they're emotionally stable enough and emotionally put together enough to be able to do it day in and day out and day in and day out, which is what you have to do to be able to meet the other two on the effect. So I played with guys who were gifted athletes, great athletes, very athletic, could do all these things, but just mentally and emotionally couldn't do the amount of work that it needed to be successful, and they failed. There were guys who were better than me that didn't have nearly the career I had because they couldn't just deal with the coaches, the grind, the information, all the other extraneous factors. They loved to play the game. They played the game great. They were good movers, but they couldn't do all the little things they needed to get there. So for that 0-0 top athletic, top pinnacle of the pyramid, it really takes that 3-prong and developing that. And I think as a coach, your job is to prepare my athlete both physically and mentally and emotionally. And you can do that through, whether it be confidence in the weight room, metabolic conditioning where you're going to teach them, not to quit, or, putting yourself in a situation where this athlete wants to play for you and do the best they can. Or you take the other side where they fear you, but I think you lose a lot more people with that type of mentality. So.
I'm gonna take a little different approach on this one, in the sense of, what's the difference between high performers and those who struggle to achieve anything in terms of getting them to achieve something, and your responsibility or your looking glass as a coach. To get your high performers to be successful is extremely easy. And that tends to be what we gravitate to as strength and conditioning coaches. If Jim Bob is my all-star, he's got the genetics, he's had the opportunity to play for the past 8 years, and he's only 18 years old, and my program is working for that guy, then it should work for everybody. And what it takes as to be a successful strength and conditioning coach is the courage to step back and not just say, what do I have to do to get Jim Bob, my all-star, better? Because everything works for that guy. It's to take a look at the individuals who are having a hard time with any sort of achievement on the field. And there are people in that group that maybe lack the genetics and lack the physical traits that allow them to be a performer. But they have the mental side of it that John just spent, most of the time talking about, because that's it. Like, this game is a mental game. And what you cannot do, it is much harder as a strength and conditioning coach to condition an athlete mentally, to give him that X factor, to give him that win or die trying type of mentality. But if they have that, and one thing I like to look for is buy-in. If they have that buy-in to the team, to the program, to the off-season training, the in-season training, if they are bought in, then there is an athlete that you could potentially improve the physical components of performance to help them combat any sort of struggle to achieve anything and turn them into a game day starter. So, that's the tricky thing as a coach is we tend to get glamored by the capable athletes, what we'll deem as the high performers, and forget about everybody else, that it's just going to take a lot more elbow grease to get them going and get them motivated and get them trained and up to par to compete on field.
That is awesome, guys, and awesome conversation so far. We've covered a ton, and so to summarize, I'm going to throw you on the spot here. The central topic was that transition training, and so in, let's say, 3 to 5 sentences, what are some big takeaways that these coaches listening can implement into their programs?
Avoid percentage-based programs. Look at terms of using a basic linear progression, very simple program, and don't get romanced into this idea that more is better, that this new Bulgarian, Russian, Chinese microcycle that works for Olympic weightlifting that I can somehow extrapolate. And there's some dude on some forum on page 47 that said I should be able to extrapolate this out to football. Don't do that. Just follow a basic, tried and true, very simple approach to programming. And more importantly, the other thing too is I think people get so wrapped up in this idea of a program, sets of numbers and reps, when in actuality it's your ability to actually do the movements. So what's more important, to have a kid come in and squat 5 heavy reps, or have a guy come in and do something more off the wall that he probably can't master. So make it simple. Put your athletes in the best position they can to succeed by just showing them basic, simple primal movement patterns that you can do with repetition, and just ramp up slowly on the deal. And then also remember, I want you to talk to their parents about getting them to sleep more. Make them turn off the phones, lock the phones, do anything you can.
Good luck, but that would be key.
Yeah, do anything you can to get those kids in bed by 9 o'clock. And then the other one is, remember that to be a strength conditioning program, the kids have to be both strong and in good shape. So if you want to have a speed program, they have to get faster. So just having these things as something for you to just mention,
check off a list.
Check off the list. You mentioned at the coaches convention, but it doesn't mean anything. It's a waste of time. So, when I always run into people I'm a strength conditioning coach. I'm like, oh, do you know how to get people strong? Yeah. Well, do you know how to get them in good shape? Not really. It's not really what I do. Well, then you're a strength coach. So really, know who you are. Stay in your wheelhouse. If you need to reach out, there's good resource in us. You can find us at Power Athlete HQ, or you can find us on Train Heroic. And remember, your job as this real first introduction for these athletes in terms of strength conditioning is such an important one, that you have the ability to prep these kids for the rest of their lives and teach them a very, very basic skill that will benefit them through their 70s. So take it slow, take it easy. do what's right, pull your ego out of it, and realize that there is no like secret that you that you're waiting to find. Everything good is out there, and there's a lot of bad stuff out there. So just wait through the bullshit to find the good stuff.
One thing I just want to tack on to the end of that, John, is going back to the fact that your athlete population, only a small percentage are going to really need significant adjustments to their in-season program. So one of the things we say is just stay the course. Stay the course. Just do the 5 lifts throughout the season. Your objective should be to continue chasing progress for every athlete. But your high performers, and just by nature of getting so many reps on the field, are going to potentially have some sort of detraining in season. But you got the other 75-80% of your athletes should still be able to make some solid progress in the weight room.
That is so much great information, guys. Really appreciate it. And if you guys want to learn more, you can connect with Luke and John at powerathletehq.com. And I'd suggest checking out the website, packed with a ton of great content and articles. And if you're interested in learning more about Train Heroic, click the link below to claim your free 14-day trial. Guys, thanks so much for coming on.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
All right, take care.
Yep.
See you, Colby.